Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Managing Risk in Your Growing Nonprofit with HR and IT Collaboration. I'm Megan Sossaman, Marketing Manager here at Dataprise, and I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items before we get into the webinar. The webinar will run about 45 minutes, and it is being recorded, and the recording and the materials will be sent to you post-event. And we ask that if you have any questions, you submit them at any time throughout the webinar in the questions section of GoToWebinar, and we will address them at the conclusion. Now, let me introduce you to Dataprise in case you don't know us. Dataprise is the leading strategic IT solutions provider to IT leaders who believe technology should allow you to be the best at what you do. On the right-hand side, you'll see some of the industry-leading solutions we deliver. Not surprisingly, cybersecurity is at the top of the list as we lead with a cyber-first mentality when delivering solutions to our clients. We then layer on the additional components to support your organization. From fully managed IT to standalone support services, we have you covered. So now let me introduce you to today's speakers. On the Dataprise side, we have JP Ruiz. JP is the risk and compliance subject matter expert at Dataprise, as well as a virtual chief information officer for our enterprise clients across a variety of industries. And from Vault Consulting, we have Kendra Janevsky, Director of Human Resources. Kendra has a varied background in nonprofit organizations, associations, and consulting, and leads Vault's HR strategy, organizational development, and personnel investment initiatives. She drives creative process improvement for internal systems, designs forward-thinking policies and programs, and executes plans for long-term growth. And really quick about Vault Consulting, they are the nation's leading accounting, human resources, and research firm for nonprofits and associations. They equip organizations of all types with the financial acumen to thrive, streamline HR processes, allowing you to focus on growth and strategy, and research-based insights to grow. Thank you both very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before I pass things off to JP and Kendra, I would like to give a quick overview of today's agenda. So we're going to start with how IT risks evolve and how it informs HR. Then we'll cover the risk management aspects of onboarding and offboarding processes. And finally, we're going to dive into knowledge and data management, touching on a variety of risk considerations and mitigation strategies. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Kendra to get us started.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Good afternoon. So HR has long been known for its paper trail, which is fairly long, from compliance to I-9s. They're used to handling many things, dealing with data and sensitive information that need to be handled carefully. And many of us in HR or in that having that responsibility still feel the best way to deal with that is to lock it into a cabinet. Obviously, the pandemic has stressed many of the HR systems that remained largely in person or in paper. And a large part of that stress, the collaboration of HR and IT can solve. So HR and IT in your organization, if you even have those functions separated by department, a lot of times those will be all housed in one or two people, but it might be limited to your payroll platform or the help desk to get a new hire started with a new computer. But as JP and I will talk about and discuss, the collaboration should be much broader than that and much deeper than that, and especially when your organization is growing and in the post-COVID environment, post-pandemic environment. So some of the issues or areas that IT and HR departments working together can tackle is the challenge of employee satisfaction. You know, it's a hot job market. Retention is key to your growth. And so looking at ways to improve satisfaction for employees, which include tools, learning and training programs, upskilling, and then access to really good frameworks for individuals, employees to be able to work more efficiently and also securely, will help grow that satisfaction for employees. They feel like they can work more efficiently and be able to use the tools safely. Obviously, IT and HR working together can create those platforms. In addition, risk increases as your organization grows to access to data, access to information. In HR has long been a very, as I mentioned before, sensitive topic for organizations. So growing without overburdening those employees that are responsible for those things can create, if they are overburdened, it creates unsafe practices where data can be, employee privacy and their information can be lost, or including loss of knowledge due to attrition. So handling those risks as the company grows is an area that HR and IT should focus on. And then finally, as we were discussing before, risk increases, understanding that data governance process, making sure that roles are established, and those roles will be changing, they'll be reestablished, they'll be demoted, they'll be promoted. So you need to make sure that there's good process and structure around that data governance, which of course IT has a huge hand in assisting with. JP, do you have anything you want to jump in there with?
No, you were pretty comprehensive with that assessment. Absolutely. I think that especially on the IT side, when we work with our client organizations and we assist their HR departments, a number of the HR goals for the year, they have significant IT crossover, everything from getting employee elicitation and what enables them specifically, like we mentioned, and handling the HR risks, reporting risk, compliance risks for HR, right? We as an IT organization attempt aligned with best practice, attempts to provide the HR departments with the tools that they need to collect that type of data, to visualize that type of data, and to report on it. And I'm sure everybody who's on the call who is part of an HR organization, you understand exactly how important that data is for the business to make the proper business decisions as it scales up. So ensuring that the HR departments are working with the IT departments is absolutely essential. We're going to be discussing a number of ways in which we do that now, and a lot of really cool tools that kind of have been developed over time to allow that collaboration.
Great. So this was, JP and I found these statistics particularly striking, at least for me as the HR team, in departments' readiness to grow. So HR is not seen really as an innovation pusher for most organizations, and I would love to help organizations move that attitude about HR departments. And really, it boils down to having processes that are very sensitive, and as long as the more collaboration between HR and IT, the better understanding there is about how to handle sensitive data securely, I think the more these attitudes can shift. So this is a study that Deloitte had put out in 2020 about the respondents to this study with thousands of participants about the HR capacity for growth in companies. And so obviously most of that light blue is the weak side, talking about holding HR accountable for innovative solutions. At 43% find that very weak. That's about making sure that new systems are being introduced, and in order to do that, you do have to create some space for yourself to create kind of multifunctional teams, including IT, how you can, establish new systems and then roll those out. It's about project planning, those agile processes that are really important in HR right now, making sure that you're setting things up for good process, good project evaluation. So holding HR accountable for innovative solutions, preparing HR staff to deliver those more innovative programs. Again, this is about good training for your people that are doing HR by IT, depending on what vendors you're using for performance management, whatever. And then providing staff the actual training to be able to do their jobs well. So these are areas I think that are really important that HR people focus on, and that even if you're not the HR person, but you're the executive director handling HR things, regardless of who's in that seat, we need to make sure that the HR pieces are capable of being innovative and automating more, creating more systems with IT that are both secure and also add to productivity.
Yeah, something that we want to focus on in the presentation, everybody, is that HR and IT are typically seen as the keeping lights on, essential things that kind of have to happen for a business to run. We don't want that to be the light blue. we don't want to be on the light blue side of it, right? We want to be on the right side of this graph. We want to be thought leaders. We want to enable the business leaders and the C-suite to be able to make the proper decisions given IT risks, given human capital risks, given capacity risks, right? And so how do we track that? How do we understand that data? Where do we keep that data? And how do we make sure that we are evolving as an HR and IT organization along with the rest of the organization as it scales up?
Great. Okay, so obviously what we're here to talk about is how growth in organizations lead to HR requirements informing IT requirements and vice versa. In order to scale, you need to create good processes that will inform and assist that growth and deliver the results that your organization needs for the growth. Implementing new solutions, looking again at what IT can help you automate will create time in your day to then think through better processes on other things. So for instance, a really great example of how IT collaborates with HR is doing SharePoint workflows or integrated ITS or ATS with your performance management systems, integrating your internal communications with like Teams or Slack to connect with all your other platforms so that things are not being either managed or monitored kind of in isolation. They can all flow together to create like the HR ecosystem that we need. So obviously as HR grows, requirements for including the EEO requirements to various compliance initiatives that require data are helped tremendously by having good IT support and having good systems to automate the collection of the data. And then, of course, IT can help with minimizing the risk of loss, making sure that that information stays with the organization, and so on. So I think it's a pretty clear line that we've drawn between how important it is for the good partnership between the two. And really, my hope is to push more people into looking for more automated, processes that they can assist their organization become more efficient as well as secure.
Absolutely. So let's start talking about one of the major functions of the HR department, and that is managing people coming in and out of the organization, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about onboarding. So the onboarding process, it's stressful. There's a lot of approval processes. There's paper going back and forth, signatures, equipment that have to go out, right? And so as a company grows, that problem does not get easier, right? And as we are navigating in the post-COVID environment, where we are seeing a lot of organizations either maintain their remote environment or their work from home a hybrid, sometimes coming into the office environment, we have to have better solutions and we have to put some strategy to how we manage the onboarding and offboarding process, right? So first off, onboarding a new user, right? We want to make sure that as we're transmitting the sensitive data, disability data, application data, background information, all of that between the HR department and the prospective employee, that entire transmission is kept secure, encrypted, or whatnot. There's a whole host of solutions there that are out there specifically for talent management. And by the way, at any point, in this webinar, we do have, Q&A section. Write down what you'd like to hear some software solutions for, because everything we're talking about today, I've got a list. I've got a list of the best practice, top 5, top 10 software solutions for any one of these individual bullet points. And we can certainly share that at the end. But making sure that you have some kind of talent management portal or system that allows you to securely send that information. I think that's pretty standard for HR, but working with your IT team to understand what are the newest and best and automated ways to do precisely that process might be something you want to include in your roadmap. So again, we talked a lot about automation optimization. Any way in which we can automate the approval workflows or the type of access that the person might need in order to start their work, right? I have seen a lot of client organizations that I've worked with where the onboarding process is pretty much a PDF or an email, where a manager will send IT an email saying, hey, look, we're thinking about bringing on this one person and they're going to need this, that, and the other. And what happens is as an organization scales up and all these kind of managers are making requests, and sometimes they go through HR and sometimes they don't, and that's not good. I'm sure everybody on the call can attest to why that's not good. It's not standardized, right? And so what happens is IT and HR have to constantly work together to ask the right questions. Wait, hold on. What kind of equipment do they need? What access to what file drive, network drive do they have to have, and do they need access to the electronic health record system if it's a healthcare company, and that's all sensitive information. Is that in the job description? So all of these questions, right? We're seeing a massive push to standardizing that process and automating it. So for example, Kendra mentioned SharePoint. We see a lot of organizations that are leveraging SharePoint to create an automated form that any manager can go ahead and put in a request. Through the form, it asks all of the questions that normally IT would ask. What exact access do they need? What licenses do they need for which applications, right? And then it goes through HR, right? And then there's an approval process, and then it comes to IT, and then they're checking off the box, and it goes back to HR and back to the manager. And this whole like automation of the approval process also allows for accountability. We sometimes see where IT might forget a step or multiple steps if it's an ad hoc process, right? And so this way, a manager or HR can look in SharePoint and can see, all right, IT did X, Y, and Z, which I asked them to, and the user should be fully provisioned, right? So having that audit log is extremely important. And more importantly, as the person in their role changes and they get promoted or they get shifted into departments, they go through the same form, right? And so they use that same form to list out what are the changes in access, and maybe they need new software now in their new position. And this is extremely important, and what we're going to talk about afterwards, the offboarding, is tracking all of this as the person moves through the organization. So during the offboarding process, we make sure that we're actually limiting or restricting access to everything. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that at an organization where somebody's being let go, and the first question is, well, what do they have access to, right? It's not just AD, right? We can't just turn off AD and, all right, we're good. What if they had access to like a third-party web portal? What if they had access to some software that everybody uses? Maybe the person leaves the organization, they had access to a bunch of passwords before with vendors that you guys do business with, and now they can still have that type of access. So how do we list that out? How do we track all that, right? And so you can automate all that. And there's solutions that are for anybody on the line that doesn't like SharePoint, and I don't blame you. Not everybody likes it. There are a whole host of them that are out there. And so when we're talking about making sure that people have the right access, we have to talk about role-based access. And this is really, really key to work with your HR departments to understand what specific jobs require what specific type of access to your data, right? For any of the attendees today in today's webinar that operate under a regulated environment, this is extremely important, whether it's government contracting, whether it's healthcare, whether it's in finance and banking, right? Not everybody can have access to everything. It's all falls under the least privilege minimum necessary rule. So working with the HR department and the IT department together to delineate what specific roles require what specific type of access, and that delineation is represented in IT, in the Active Directory, in Office 365, in Google Admin for our G Suite users, right, is paramount. Before I move on to assets, because that's a little tricky, Kendra, any thoughts on this whole onboarding process and some of the pain points you've seen in your consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't reiterate how important that onboarding process is for the company, but also for the individual, and showing their first 90 days, an employee is looking to get started, to provide value immediately, and to be able to operate and start work pretty much immediately. Even though you might have a 2-week onboarding process, they want to start proving that they have the tools for the job. So the access levels and being denied access or not having access to the tools that they need to do their job can be really demoralizing and really inhibit the person's ability or their opinion about the organization. So from the employee perspective as well, your first 90 days are so important, as we all know, for new hires to come in and feel like they have the tools they need. We want to make sure that those processes are outlined for them too. And so checklists, making sure though all checklists could be automated. It's an amazing thing about checklists. So try to think, of all the processes you go through, anything that is kind of a consistent check the box kind of thing are areas for innovation and for automation.
And so for everybody that's on the line, that they're thinking, all right, well, maybe we're doing it in a manual process. Right now it's ad hoc, like JP and Kendra are saying, so what should we do, right? The checklist that you go down when you're thinking about a solution for this, right? Think about everything that it's involved in onboarding. It's not just, document management, right? It's not just the approval workflows, but it's also training management, right? And so a lot of different solutions have the whole training management portion of it, making sure they're getting their cybersecurity training, their HIPAA training, their PCI training, or whatever it is, that they need during the onboarding step. Task management, right? Allowing them maybe to even have a self-service portal, right? And so a lot of different solutions have that. I know like Bamboo HR rolled that out a while back. Remote work rolled that out as well, and it's been very, very helpful. And the whole orientation process, right? For a lot of our attendees today, I'm sure orientation is not just one person sitting down, right? If they got to talk to IT, they got to talk to their manager, maybe they talk to senior leadership to understand the business. So automating that entire workflow and scheduling, it's extremely important. And so if you want to do something like that or revamp your HR department to do better onboarding and offboarding, the first people you talk to is IT. They collect these requirements. I want to do this. This is my wish list. This is my current pain points. And if your IT department is worth their salt, then they should be assisting you in scoping out the solutions. And if they're not, that's why you have Dataprise. But in all seriousness, right? So that's extremely important. And I can't downplay the importance of asset provisioning. How do you guys get the laptop, the monitor, all that other stuff to them, right? And because we're in a remote environment, I'm sure many of you have had to think about that over the past 2 years, but making sure that entire process is automated and that we bookkeep the right way, who has access to what equipment and whatnot, is extremely important. Or else you're chasing down, trying to figure out what, when somebody's being offboarded, what exactly did they have? Did they have a laptop? How many monitors? Was it 1, 2? What do we have to get back from them? And then automating that entire process of shipping and delivering and signing and all that. A lot of these solutions that I mentioned, they incorporate that as well, some form of IT asset management process. But either way, that's something that you're going to have to work with your IT team on. And I mentioned employee role bookkeeping. That's basically, again, how do we document all the changes that an employee has throughout their tenure in the organization? That's absolutely essential. So, on the flip side, talking about offboarding, right? This can arguably be even more critical because of the insider risk, right? I already mentioned IT asset management. How do we collect that hardware back from them and having a process in place? Internal comms, though, right? So when somebody's being offboarded, and this is especially important when somebody's being offboarded involuntarily, HR and IT has to have a process in order to at the same time simultaneously letting somebody go and also revoking all of that access. Without working with your IT department on this or without having a standardized solution or a process in place, there may be lag time between those two events. And for every minute that there's lag time, there's potential for sabotage. There's potential for the person who's being let go to harvest data. I mean, especially during COVID, right? I saw so many cases of organizations that had their client lists leaked or had proprietary data that was pulled as a result of letting somebody go because they were in a work from home environment. There may have been some lag and IT wasn't fully developed. They didn't have that process developed really well with HR and that causes a lot of problems, right? So insider risk, trying to limit the potential for damage. I mean, HR departments are keenly aware of the risk here when somebody is a disgruntled employee, whether they have left the organization or not. So having the right tools in place to ensure that this does not get realized is important. And again, insider risk is any type of risk that is materially damaging to an organization that is caused by an insider, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, right? And so proper access controls, we talked about this, right? Minimum necessary, making sure that people only have access to what they need to do their job. And there are a whole host of solutions out there on the cybersecurity side of things that's all around threat detection, especially threat detection on the endpoints, the laptops, the workstations. And so you can, and actually they're fairly economic in pricing, but you can look into user and entity behavior analytics software, UEBA, or any type of managed detection software and roll that out to your laptops. And what that'll do is it tracks the type of behavior that a user has. typical, I log in, I'm in spreadsheets for a little bit, I'm in the intranet every now and again, and it'll determine over time the kind of pattern that the person, does in their workday. And whenever that's breached to a great extent, it'll alert HR and IT, like, hey, hold on one second. We're picking up that this guy is downloading everything from your SharePoint site. That is not what he normally does. And so we get an alert, we can put a stop to it immediately, and HR can intervene and find out, is this guy flight risk? Is he trying to go ahead and pull all of this data because he's trying to sell it to some other organization, right? This is an HR problem and an IT problem that requires a collaboration to work successfully, right? And so this is a whole new set of solutions. This is still fairly new, fairly a cutting edge type of technology for this user and entity behavior analytics. But it's this kind of conversation my IT professionals on the call need to be having with HR, and my HR professionals need to be having with IT, so they can scope that out appropriately.
Absolutely.
Kendra, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and maybe that the UEBA might be too much for your organization, but starting the conversation while pre-growth about what are the proper controls, who has the proper access, and honestly, depending on what kind of information, especially if it's government data, especially if you have contracts and grants from government organizations, knowing what those data point, how secure they need to be, how are you managing that, and how could you respond if you did have a data breach? What would be the conversation that you had? I had no clue that we had this gap in our, so that's where IT and HR need to collaborate to do that. It's keeping your information safe from walking out the door. And I would even also like to highlight a lot of clients that I've seen have, when someone is terminated, i.e. involuntarily, they have a pretty tight system, right? They know, okay, this is sensitive, it could go sideways. People that resign could also have the same intent for your organization. And a lot of times with clients, I'll see that they haven't even informed IT that the person has left the organization. And so that person still has access to email, they still have access to client information or your donor lists or whatever it happens to be. And it can continue for a long time afterwards. So knowing that a termination is both voluntary, involuntary, treating those the same and making sure that your good hygiene about communication between IT and HR is happening. And I think that that's really a key thing as you grow, obviously. But knowing that those advanced technologies are out there is part of what is going to inform the decision. And if you do have the conversations with your employees that say, well, I'm sorry, I know you used to have access to this, but we're taking access away for these reasons. If you're talking about security, you're talking about need to know, people would be understanding about knowing that, okay, well, the organization is trying to be more secure. That's why I'm not, able to access all the keys to the castle anymore. It's not about the person, it's about the function or the role.
No, absolutely. All right, so moving on from all of this, data governance. Kendra, I know you know all about, right, the type of HR data and why it's so sensitive. Why do we need to think about HR data with greater scrutiny as an organization grows? Talk us through some of this.
Yeah, so obviously the data that we're handling, every point in HR can be, it's about people, but people provide data, right? Through surveys, through other metrics that, and like JP has a number of vendors available. I also have data metrics that might be helpful for your department to track, might be helpful for your organization to track as you grow. So making sure that your systems and your processes are able to be identified, classified in the right way, setting up systems that, for instance, your document retention policies might have been related to paper, and you're now moving everything online, making sure that those pieces of information are appropriately tagged for your IT department so that they can appropriately manage that data as it ages in your systems, as you're moving forward and growing. That is going to be obviously very important. The data visualization, making sure that you are able to track the information that you need in order to provide good solutions for your leadership to make decisions about where your human capital needs to expand, what departments are actually having, you know, positive results on what the strategy of the organization are and how to support those. It's all informed by those metrics that you're gathering through your ATS, through like time to fill, applicant tracking systems, time to fill data, information about cost per hire. Then you have your payroll systems that should be providing good EEO1 data, good information for filing your regulatory reports. All of that stuff obviously leads to decision making for your leadership. So how do you best take the data and make good visualization of it for leadership decision making? Working with your IT department is the best way to kind of figure out where you can add more information gathering tools and how to use those to the best of their ability. You don't have to know everything. That's why you have people on your side, you know, teams that work together to create these systems. And data governance is probably one of HR's kind of jokingly is sort of a sore spot for HR, because everybody always talks about the people and they don't talk enough about the data behind the people. So I think that that's an area for a lot of growth, especially as your organization is changing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And making sure that as we're collecting all this information, we're doing the data visualization, right? You're reviewing with your team, right? So anybody who's on the call, any of the managers, leaders, maybe of the HR organization, that you're talking with the team, do you guys even like Tableau? Do you guys even like using Power BI? Is there something that you wish that Spotfire was doing that it doesn't do? And so those kind of conversations were requirements gathering. That's the information you give to your IT team and say, hey, look, we don't really actually like this tool, and we kind of want to try to do something different. And then they work with the vendor to either fix the problem or scope out a new solution. All of the data and the programs that have worked, and our HR department has pushed out a new mentorship program, and these are the metrics that came from that. This is how much retention that we received and how much more internal promotions that we've done, and all of that information. Where do you house it, right? And a lot of that is very, very sensitive information, feedback maybe from the staff or whatnot. And so making sure that you have internal data repositories and knowledge bases, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a moment, is also absolutely important in the discussion about data governance, right? And so making sure you bring the knowledge base portion of it into the discussion with your IT team is something we strongly advise. So data governance is important, but data governance kind of falls into a larger umbrella of knowledge management. So we're going to talk now about knowledge management and how we manage all of this, all of the processes and all of the different data sets and who talks to who, and the tools and training and technology that's required for your business to run, the lifeblood of your business, right? And so that's all about business process mapping to start, right? Understanding that. So Kendra, in the work that you've done with your clients, right? How important is it, and what you've seen in addressing some of the problems that maybe the HR organizations have had, in understanding the full business, right? And understanding how people relate to each other? What have you seen?
Yeah, so this has really been big. I know the previous slides were dealing with offboarding and that kind of thing. But as the organizations are growing, I've seen a lot of clients have these sources of the one person that knows everything in the organization and every process. And so they're the person that everyone consults. And then this person leaves or becomes a bottleneck, which is kind of this issue. So it's been very important starting out with even providing assistance to that bottleneck themselves, figuring out all of the knowledge that they hold, coming up with a plan for peeling all of that knowledge away and streamlining it so that there is a process, and figuring out, really, that's where HR can really help, is this appropriate for this person at this role with this much responsibility at the time? Do we need to add, that's part of the human capital sort of overall strategy for all organizations. And that's the piece that HR can really help with. When you know that in your business unit or in your overall organization, things aren't able to grow as quickly or things aren't able to grow as efficiently because of one person's inability to get all the work done, which speaks nothing to them. It doesn't mean that, everybody gets overwhelmed, but that's the point at which you realize, okay, now's the time to really analyze how much workload the person has, how to transfer those skills in what best way, the knowledge, and figuring out how to bring in IT. Some of those things can be used, better systems. For instance, one client was going through, time reporting is a big thing for HR, for nonprofit clients, especially when they have grants where they're doing grant reporting. So time reporting is a huge issue. And when you're doing it manually or on paper, or you have, a time reporting that doesn't also flow into your payroll, or all of these things where there's finite processes that can be streamlined and save a ton of time for a lot of different departments. That's an area that I think, making sure time reporting happens with the most innovative tools, because there's some fantastic solutions out there that can really help that. That's one area that I think is probably one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so when we're talking about business process mapping, everybody, right? If we take a quick step back, so why are we thinking about the full business, and why does it matter? We're HR, we're talking about people and how they relate to each other. But this is absolutely important for multiple reasons. First, it creates a shared understanding of how the business processes work. And when people understand how the business process work and it's outlined in a nice visual format, there's better understanding amongst the team members. And visual aids, I'm sure everybody agrees, is much better than like very long technical documents, right? And so when you do that business process mapping, you create that process standardization. Hey, everybody, now we know this is a step in which this department delivers this report to this department, delivers this report to this department. And we understand how data flows in the environment. And where does HR come in? Well, HR comes in when they identify that there's a bottleneck somewhere in that process. And they're like, maybe this department that everybody's kind of waiting on, it's a human capital problem. It's a capacity management problem, right? Maybe we can alleviate that with more resources. Maybe we can work with IT to try to make some of their manual processes more automated, right? And so understanding doing that bottleneck analysis is something that changes the HR department from that light blue that we saw at the beginning, right? Where they're just kind of working with people and handling complaints and talent management, which is not truly what HR only does, right? And we all know this, but moving it towards the thought leader, the business leader in the organization, we're taking a proactive stance in identifying business things that can be fixed with the right type of HR and people strategies, right? And we can use IT to enable those strategies to be successful. And so that's why this is so important. Now, I noticed that we did get a question from one of the slides we were talking about earlier, all about HR analytics, and this is important and related, right? Because this type of bottleneck analysis does kind of tie into HR analytics as a whole. But HR analytics, just so that everybody is aware, it's people analytics, workforce analytics, talent analytics, all kind of being ways in which we collect data around people, right? And so the analytics software is all about conglomerating that data, visualizing that data, and allowing HR to make strategic business decisions with the business leaders on that data. And so I mentioned a couple of examples. HR analytics could be something as simple as we sent out surveys to understand whether people were accepting of the change into the remote environment as a result of COVID and how difficult that was. Or it could be whether people feel they're adequately trained for their job based on their role responsibilities. It could be that HR, like I mentioned earlier, has established a mentor-mentee program and they want to use the data that came from that to understand whether it's successful or not, and understanding whether there's an ROI to something like that. And if the metrics of success, those HR metrics we talked about earlier, and they're working with IT to develop those, were something like the amount of time or the amount of people that were internally promoted versus external promotions, and seeing that at an increase in terms of a mentor-mentee program, then you know that that's one positive outcome, right? So that whole mentality, everything I'm describing, that process of analyzing this data that comes from surveys, that comes from interviews, that comes from all of these different type of data sets, and viewing it right in a way that senior leadership can make organizational decisions is absolutely important. And so again, we're talking about companies that are scaling up, and especially right now in this post-COVID environment where you have this great resignation and people are coming from all over the place and they're working from home and people are switching jobs, right? All of a sudden, now you have people that you're managing outside of your state, right? And you're growing as an organization. Now you have people that are communicating across state lines, maybe even country lines. And so how do we measure the productivity of people that are so far away? How do we identify whether or not there's a bottleneck that we're making as a result of opening up our talent pool in that manner, right? And so there's ways to capture that data. There's metrics, and that's Kendra's entire organization is dedicated to helping, people navigate those type of questions, right? And ask the right questions and collect the right type of data. And so how high is your annual employee turnover? How much of your that turnover is consisted of some kind of like regretted loss or what have you. Those are the kind of questions that go into HR analytics. And so on the software side, there are solutions that assist with the collection of that data and the visualization of the data and automation of that into reports. I mean, there's a ton that are out there. We've rolled out a whole host of them, and again, at the end, I can provide some examples during the Q&A. So yeah, so bottlenecks. Thank you, Kendra, for talking a little bit about that. And so you mentioned something that's very important that we definitely wanted to hit on before we go into Q&A, is key personnel dependency, right? One guy knows all this stuff, and that guy, wins the lottery, gets hit by a bus, decides to leave the organization, whatever, right? That's a huge risk. And it isn't even just a person. It might be a process. It might be a vendor, right? Our entire organization is reliant on this vendor being up, having uptime, not losing our data, right? So working with the IT team, HR team, and business leaders in general to identify who are those people? What are those vendors? What are the departments that we absolutely need to make sure have redundancy or resiliency in the event of a disaster or some change? How do we not only identify those people, but keep them within the organization? And obviously, employee retention is a big HR function. But no, maybe the person, we can't expect them to stay forever, right? And there's only so much that retention can do. So how do we harvest that information from the person in a way where we can have it, for the future? And so when we're talking about organizations that are scaling up, and we see organizations are starting to open up new sites or enter new states or navigate new laws. I mean, I know I have clients that are trying to expand into California, for example, and I'm sure everybody on the phone call knows how complicated California labor laws and all that are. So yeah, right. So where do you house that information, right? What happens if the analyst in your HR team leaves and they were the one that were in charge? So making sure that we have a knowledge base, step one. Knowledge base. That could be an intranet, it could be an internal wiki, it could be a SharePoint site, doesn't matter, right? But some kind of knowledge base, and your IT team can assist in scoping out what that looks like and what's going to be the best for your organization is essentially important. You're capturing that data, right? It becomes the property of your organization, not the one guy, that may leave, right? Cross-training users, right? And so that's something we're seeing a lot, right? If we know that Kendra, for example, she's like the subject matter expert on this specific process, maybe we want somebody to shadow her so that they can start getting some of that knowledge as well. Maybe we can try to cross-train. And so there's a whole host of solutions out there, software solutions that HR can work with to enable this, to automate it, right? And so, for example, you could, giving LinkedIn Learning as an example, you could use LinkedIn Learning where Kendra decides she's going to select these 5 courses that a person who wants to learn her role should take first. And once they take it, she gets notified, and we can make that automated that they've gotten the badges, they've took the courses. Now they're going to be a little more knowledgeable, and when they shadow her, they can ask the right questions. And she doesn't have to spend time trying to teach them those 5 courses herself. So now it's opened up her bandwidth. You guys have an audit log, an audit trail of the person actively doing this internal training. And so you can see how software solutions can assist with the whole cross-training mentality, which ultimately reduces your key person risk, which helps the organization, right? And then lastly, succession planning. Sometimes there's going to be people that are so integral, your C-suite, your business unit leaders, some subject matter expert, that if they leave, you have to have a plan in place, right? And so for many people on the call today, their IT organization usually leads the disaster recovery conversations, right? And disaster recovery for IT sometimes look like power went out, internet went out, right? How this software solution went out and how do we get it back up? But disaster recovery also includes, what about people outages? What about if key person leaves, right? What do you do in terms of business continuity? And so succession planning is something you have to work with the HR departments to determine in what way do we succeed a person, like if a person leaves, how do we move somebody into that role? How do we properly equip them with the right tools and software and training? And so if the succession planning is, Kendra's leaving the organization and our understudy is going to come in, does IT have a whole workflow ready to go, right? Do they have a flow chart? Do they have, well, all right, so we need to give her access to this as part of her role. We need to train her on these software solutions. And so that kind of stuff goes into a DR plan, and that falls under succession planning, and that's an HRIT discussion, right? So key personnel dependency, first step, guys, identify what those key people are. And so finally, before we go into Q&A, last is just really internal communications. Right.
Yeah,
Kendra, I'm sure you've seen this change quite a bit as a result of COVID, right? So
yes,
what are we talking about here?
it sure has. And a lot of new hires and a lot of clients have had people come into the organization and be completely flummoxed by where they talk to people, how they get information. The internal communications does require a lot of communication, surprise, and some thought and process documentation. So you need to be clear about where your internal communication channels are, what they are, and obviously in a hybrid environment, they need to be supported by IT. Those kinds of systems, once they're put in place, making sure that the information is easily accessible once new people come in, or when people are looking for the information afterwards. Some clients, if they use Teams, for instance, all of their new policy information comes through Teams. Well, how does someone that's newer to the organization find that information when they're coming in? Where do the policies live? Like, how do you communicate changes, promotions, all of these things? So obviously being intentional, setting that up, being clear about what are our internal communication channels, making sure you don't just use one in a hybrid environment. Users might be more comfortable using Teams, but then some might be more comfortable using email. Some people might be more comfortable using other channels of communication that if you don't set from the organization's perspective what are the proper channels, people can be left feeling out of the loop, don't know what to do next, who to go to, and all that stuff. It just looks messy from your organization's perspective. So security risks, of course, with that internal communications, you can't really be emailing a bunch of sensitive stuff to each other and making that clear. So you also need to be very explicit about what are the proper secure channels to share sensitive information. How do you share documents once they're in SharePoint or other site, intranet? What are the ways to invite people to use the documents, share the documents, update the documents? And so all of these things, once you have thought through them with your team, it's important to document that, communicate that, and make sure that IT is supportive, understands where security risk might be in those communications, and is approving of the overall process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And remember, everybody, we're talking about as businesses scale up, right? And so as you increase your user count, more people are emailing, more people are getting confused by, oh, when do I use Glip with RingCentral or Slack or Teams or calling somebody versus emailing, right? And so HR, working with IT, at least for a lot of my organizations, as a result of COVID and the confusion, we sent out, one pagers, like quick little guides. If this is the kind of conversation this should be a Teams chat with webcam on. If this is this kind of type of question, you should call the person. This is when you should CC people so that you prevent things like email bloat. Many organizations that I started working with over the past 2 years have been trying to navigate this specific problem. We're like, look, we tried to enable users as a result of COVID, and now there's so many software solutions, and we don't know which ones people like. There's confusion. And then same thing with what Kendra said. What about collaborative software? I don't think I've actually entered an organization as their CIO and ever found an organization that had a standard single source for how they share files internally and externally. It's like, oh, well, we use Dropbox, but this department uses Box, but this department uses SharePoint. This one has a direct, FTP site. It's not great, guys, right? So especially again for our regulated industry folks on the line, making sure that you identify what are the proper communication channels. When should people be using which one? And that's not an IT decision, right? That's an HR decision working with IT. And then you train the users appropriately, right? And then you secure those communication channels that you know are going to have that sensitive data traffic, right? And there's all sorts of stuff that you can do to secure that. In on the IT side of the shop, that's data loss prevention, right? And so if you know that just in the course of doing business, your organization tends to send emails with sensitive data, then you can make it so that your IT department establishes data loss prevention practices in Office 365 or whatnot to scan for and block or warn whenever somebody's trying to send a credit card like credit card numbers or social security numbers. Like, hey, look, we noticed that your document has a bunch of social security numbers. This is against policy. Either mask them or use another secure method, whatever your organization has deemed to be the most secure. So that's the kind of conversation you want to have with your IT department, and they should have solutions for you to be able to navigate that. So I know we talked a lot about a whole host of things, right? So Kendra, final thoughts, right? Everybody who's on the call, hearing all of these things around HR and IT, new solutions, strategies they should consider. What do you think is going to be like their big takeaway that you want them to walk away from this webinar with? The kind of questions they should be asking their internal teams?
Yeah, I would say, number one is look at your processes, that kind of the day-to-day, and look for areas that you feel like could help you in automation. I think that is something that people don't think of enough. Number two, reach out to your IT department once you figure those out for automation and how you can best utilize the tools that you have available to you. And I think number three is really look at your vendors that you use and make sure, I think that's another area that IT should be involved in, make sure that those are secure, that they're, top cutting edge innovative. Like if there are some vendor reviews or, doing some RFPs, making sure that your vendors are the best of the best. I think that's really the main takeaways that I would say.
Yeah, and on my end, I would say that for all the organizations that I've entered, I've always fostered a monthly or bi-weekly meeting between the HR and IT departments. And so there's two major reasons for that. One is everything we just discussed, right? There's obviously a lot of crossover and whatever. But two, I think both of these departments typically feel that they don't have enough input into the business, right? Like I want to help the senior leadership make business decisions based on people or based on technology. And so working together as a kind of the underdogs here, right? Oftentimes I found that HR is very receptive to IT's suggestions like, oh, I didn't know you guys are trying to do this. Here's a cool solution. And likewise, IT would be proactive in those conversations as well. Hey, we're being swamped with all kinds of onboarding requests. Can we try to standardize this a little bit and work with you to develop some kind of standard process? And so even just starting those biweekly calls and just have the departments on the line, I guarantee you that if you start that, there's going to be brainstorming that's going to occur, and there's going to be these topics are going to come up in some form, right? And so then you guys can start the collaborative process of collecting requirements and looking at solutions and what have you. But really, that's the big takeaway here, folks. Engage and set up a standing meeting and see what comes from the conversation. And if at any point there is a problem that's identified, then there you go. Now you have a project you guys can work through together. And like I mentioned, there's plenty of solutions for all of that. So, I mean, thank you guys for attending the webinar. Now we'll take any questions. Feel free to post questions in the chat, and we'll be able to answer those for you. So it looks like we have one small question regarding how this how all of this relates to bring your home devices and how we navigate HR and stuff, right? So that is a tricky one, especially in regards to COVID. we did see a lot of organizations start allowing bring your own devices, your own personal devices. And so certainly a lot of the IT solutions we're talking about, especially ones that that assist HR in making those decisions, we have to navigate carefully around making sure that it's secure, because we are talking about personal devices in which who knows what else they're doing on that computer, right? And more importantly, B, that we're compartmentalizing all the IT solutions and business processes to a specific portion of the computer, right? We saw this especially in COVID in our regulated industries, where sometimes we had staff that would use their own devices to do sensitive work, right? And so HR had to work with IT to develop proper policies for remote work and telework. If you're going to telework, this is the type of things that we allow, right? Under our HR policies, these are the type of things we don't allow. Maybe we don't allow people to work from Starbucks because the Wi-Fi there is less secure, right? Maybe we want to allow people to work from Starbucks. Then we have to work with IT. What can we put on that person's device? Maybe even if it's a personal device, maybe we can offer them something that can make it a little bit more secure. So again, when you're thinking about bring your own devices or your personal devices, just think about security and how we can work with IT to establish better security for those folks. And on the HR side, what are the policies and processes that we do allow? What is considered acceptable use when you're using those policies, and how does that relate to telework environment and telecommunication or telework agreements that they do sign on to? And I did get a couple of questions on the software list I mentioned. So we did talk about a whole host of different projects, right? So I mean, I have software for knowledge bases. I have software for doing capacity management, right? We didn't talk about this, but at least when it came to COVID, right, there was a huge software all that HR and IT worked together, which was space management, right? How do we make sure that people are maintaining six feet? So even as problems evolve, HR and IT can come together to try to address those problems. There's data tagging and classification solutions. I mean, I mentioned a bunch of data visualization solutions. So what I recommend is anybody who's on the call, if they're like, you know what, we would like to at least hear what some of those software solutions are, reach out to our teams, right? Kendra's got a whole host of solutions on her side. I've got a whole host of solutions on our side. You know where to find us, you know our websites and whatnot. Reach out to our teams. We'll supply you with the information you need. I've got a whole host. Otherwise, I'm sending everybody that attended an email that is very, very long with a lot of solutions on there. But please, reach out. That's what we're here for. We're here to assist. We want to see these organizations succeed because your success is our success. Any last questions? All right, looks like we're good. Well then, at least on my end, thank you everybody for attending the conversation. Kendra, thank you so much for all of your insights today as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, JP. And feel free to reach out if you need any assistance and we'll be happy to share, vendor tools, whatever.